Let's get on with it. We are finally here. We're on. Welcome everyone back. This is another episode of the Go-to-Market Kickback. I'm joined by a phenomenal guest, good partner, friend, client, incredible sales leader in the space of cybersecurity and enterprise software functions, Mr. Keith Abramson. How you doing, Keith?
I'm doing well. It's Friday. Thanks for having me. We've been planning this for what, a good 6 months? So we
A
got
little
here.
while. I finally got around to it. We've been working together for longer than that, probably the last year and a half, 2 years now, right? And I'd like to think had some good successes and wins together. And I've learned a lot from you and just these teams and organizations and plans that you're building, right? And some of these very early stage companies, right? And our networks have combined in some pretty useful ways, which is always interesting to find each other with. But little backdrop on yourself. Tell me if this is accurate. I mean, market leading, go to market leader, right? Cyber and GRC expert, startup enthusiast, highly respected leader, mentor, partner. Those are all things I've heard from other people, not self-accredited. So I can stand here and say that they're absolutely true. Currently the VP of sales at a Series A cyber compliance and GRC startup, Cypago, and doing wonderful things in the last year that you've been there already, right? And made some very impressive groundwork. Tell us about yourself, Keith. Set the stage. Tell me who you are and what the people should know about you to kick us off.
Absolutely. I think I was destined or doomed, one or the other. Depends on the day. It depends if deals are pushing or closing. I would say destined or doomed to get into
Yeah.
sales. It's the only job I've ever had, starting with, I started work at 13, never stopped, and I've only ever had sales jobs. I think through college, I actually never intended to get into sales, which was the crazy part. But my entire family is salespeople. My mother, my father, my brother, we all just ended up being in it. And the funny thing is, it was never something my parents overtly encouraged, but it was always something that was a bit of an undercurrent. There was always this principle of you can have whatever you want if you work for it. And that always stuck with me. And I think sales is one of the few professions where effort correlates one-to-one into results. Presuming, of course, you have the right methodology and the right motion and the right guiding principles, but effort correlates to paycheck. Very few professions like that, unless you hang your own shingle. And even then can be a little challenging. And you can make the argument that if you're self-employed, you're selling anyway. But maybe the only other one is investment banking, maybe, where effort translates directly to paycheck. But I was always, and I think this is a common theme for salespeople, most of us are coin fed and we like stuff. We like the tangible to be the reward of the effort. And I was always like that. And I remember even going back to college, I worked full time while I was going to school, not because I had to. I was on almost a full academic, but it was because I wanted a really cool car, and my parents very rightfully said, absolutely not. You don't need a car like that. You're a college kid. So I said, okay, I'll buy it myself. So, and that's what I did. And I worked full time just so I could be ridiculous and have a ridiculous car. And I remember in college, of course, my friends thought I was outrageously spoiled, and it was, no, I'm leaving campus. I'm going to go work at a straight commission job because I want to have this car, not because my parents gave it to me. No, not at all. And I always
spoiled
loved,
doesn't always mean not well earned.
yeah, exactly. Spoil yourself. That's one thing. But sales wise, I fell into it. And I was in college about to graduate, and I remember that one of my friends started working, and this was the heyday of the mortgage boom. And he started crushing it as a loan officer, which is really just a glorified title for salesperson. And he recommended my name to the owners, actually, even without telling me, and basically called me and said to me, I got you an interview. You have to come work at this place. You're going to. I said, all right. And it turned into an opportunity that I thought was pretty interesting. I did it for a couple of years, crushed it. I mean, This was practically Glengarry Glen Ross style back in the Stone Ages, right? We had a stack of paper leads, a pen, some paper, and a phone on our desk, and it was just dialing for dollars. But it was great. I loved it. I started figuring out the ways and means to make that work and make sense of it. And I got promoted there, started managing some people even while I was there really early in my career, had some ideas for the business, and then went out and did actually hang my own shingle and started my own thing. And we grew that to having maybe about 20 salespeople or so under us. And of course, when the bottom fell out of the mortgage market, I had to go reinvent myself. And after a lot of digging and a lot of research, I came upon B2B software sales as something that would really build upon all these principles that I had been honing. And of course, I had the world's craziest resume at that point. I'd never actually had a real job. I'd always been either a 1099 or a straight commission salesperson or having my own company. So it was a little hard. I had a little humble pie, and after having this multi-million-dollar business, said, okay, fine. I ate crow and said, okay, I'll go be a salesperson again, just to prove it. But really, my aim was to get back into management. I fell in love with management pretty early on, and there's so much about it that I found so incredibly rewarding. It's a force multiplier, and you can you can only have so much impact as a single individual, no matter how good you are. But yet, as a manager, you are scaled at the rate of how many people you have. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I always loved that principle. It's so much fun when done well. Different challenges, but it's a lot of fun. And fast forward a couple of years, I've made my way through a couple of startups, some really successful. I've been fortunate enough to have some amazing mentors that took me under their wing along the way, and have carved out this niche of working for foreign startups starting to expand into the US market, which is a lot of fun. It
Yeah.
is certainly a different challenge every single day. And where I would end that story is probably one of the most interesting pieces of being an early stage tech startups is there's this personality quirk that is we are the type, and I would consider this across every single function at a seed to Series A startup. We're the type that sees a burning building and says, oh, look, I should go run into that. And that's what we do every single day, over and over and over again. It's very contrary to, I think, normal human thinking.
Yeah.
That's what we do over and over and over
Pail of
again.
water in hand. Yeah.
Exactly. Or even less, it plans to maybe build a bucket.
Yeah. Well, it's not for the lighthearted, and you've had a lot of great tangible successes, both in developing talent, building organizations, extracting a lot of value, producing a lot of value for these companies, right? Which it's surprisingly exceptionally hard to do, right? Particularly at that stage, right? And you've done very well with it, and you're doing very well with it right now. Our topic we want to talk about today, thank you for the backdrop, is some changing themes, right? And modern go-to-market approaches, mostly around lead signaling, right? And this concept of what you kind of coined as inbound led outbound, right? And sort of analyzing buyer intent, buying signals,
Mhm.
and sales motions from the client side, and sort of their diligence in a different way to enable your outbound campaigns. Can you talk about that quickly from a high level? Like,
Sure.
what is this trend that you're seeing happen, and how's it
Sure.
manifesting itself?
Sure. So, without going too much into a history lesson, I think most people know at this point that are in the space that sales, this B2B tech sales, has undergone this radical paradigm shift and effectively a reinvention over the course of the past 12 to 18 months or so. And without delving into the causes there, of course, a lot of the changes in the venture market caused that and a lot of other dynamics. One could argue that our entire downfall started with the publication of predictable revenue, which worked incredibly well for a long time. And I'll admit, I remember handing that book to leaders I worked for at the time and saying, this is awesome. And a lot of it was. It was basically a roadmap to go blitz scale, to coin another, or to quote another book, right? But it was awesome for a while, but that led to a lot of the crash and burn, I would argue, as well. And there's a lot of chatter. Of course, predictable revenue is dead. And I'm not one for the hyperbole that's going around the LinkedIn echo chamber that says everything is dead, because that's LinkedIn sales. Is you name it and somebody's posting the clickbait that says it's dead. But predictable revenue really is dead. It's done and over. And that thought process, of course, is just throwing people out to market and having unskilled effort just return some small percentage of return. But that small percentage of return is good enough when done en masse and you throw enough bodies at the thing. Well,
Yeah.
combine that or stack that on top of what's happened and this contraction in the B2B tech market, where we need to drive to what Sam at Pavilion calls profitable, efficient growth. All of a sudden, predictable revenue, which requires that you throw a lot of cannon fodder out there, you throw 40 SDRs expecting that only the top 5 are going to succeed, and that works because you have this never-ending reserve and well of funding money in the background that's just going to keep giving it to you so you can hit absurd growth numbers. Well, all of a sudden that no longer works. So what we've been forced to do is get much more analytical, have much more methodology on how we're going to market, because this idea of spray and pray doesn't work if you only have 1 or 2 BDRs. And of course, you have these inured buyers that are now doubly over it, because not only have they been beaten up by salespeople that are just trying to set a meeting without any value of that meeting for the buyer. Now you have the rise of the AI-driven prospecting. So inboxes have just become a glut of noise. That's really hard to break your way through with just effort. So there's some nascent motions that say, instead of just trying to penetrate through, if you can find a way to respond to the evidence of some measure of interest appropriately for the stage that the buyer is in, especially vis-a-vis this idea that increasingly, and this has been true for a while, buyer research cycles are extending the length of the actual sales cycle. More and more and more buyer research is done independently of the salesperson. So if you can find a way to contribute, to facilitate, to enable, to assist from a buyer perspective, it's an old solution selling principle. He that is first in the door wins. We need to be first in the door early, but understand the dynamic of buyer interaction. Bring that down to the practical level. What does that actually mean? Leveraging some of the new breed of tools that are giving these signals to the sales side, and not hopping on and again just trying to set a meeting, but understanding the nature that says buyers are doing more and more independent research. And if we can facilitate, it's back to the old axioms of content marketing. We need to, as salespeople, fold in some of those principles of content marketing. We need to teach our buyers to fish before we sell the fishing rod. And that's where a lot I'm finding is trending towards and is becoming more effective in terms of motion.
Would you call that a simplification of the process in some ways?
Sure.
It's interesting because you're utilizing, and you have to utilize much more modern technology. You quoted me some the other day, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
looking for these signals, who's clicking on your
Yes.
webpage, who's downloading content, who's engaging with you on social media, who's connected to buyers and referral programs and things like that, right? But the actual process and interaction is so much simpler when it gets to that sales level because it's enabled with so much precursor to it, right? Through that sort of engagement before you ever talk to them. Is that a fair analysis?
Sure. I think that, well, it's the other axiom that started to go around. I think it was Win AI that coined it, right? Is that AI isn't going to replace you, but a salesperson using AI probably will. And I think
Yeah.
that's a fair statement, which is that what is AI when done well? It's a force multiplier. So the job of the salesperson while not necessarily easier, the modern salesperson is simplifying and streamlining by leveraging modern tech to enable the automation of some of those pre-warming steps, the messaging, the engagement, to ideally get in front of buyers that are actually at phase B of a buying process, which is, I have decided to buy. I have decided to buy now. Now let me decide between you and the other alternative choices. Of course, that's not always possible, and I don't think we can shirk the responsibility that's would be contrary to everything I said before, right? We do need to recognize those buyers that haven't yet decided to move, and especially with early adopter tech selling to early adopters, it is your responsibility to help and educate and teach, and then go into what I think is one of the most important principles, and it's one I could probably speak for about 5 hours on, which is the biggest dramatic shift in, I think, the modern sales zeitgeist is the need. And this is, I think, what solution selling was predicated on, but never actually really worked. We're not selling the inherent virtue of the object itself. And I think PLG ruined the sales motion and ruined a whole generation of salespeople. And this is something I preach about constantly. PLG is predicated on people engaging with the product, of course, and then raising their hand and saying, I'm ready to buy. And then you've got product-led sales as a derivation thereof, which is that they use the product, they fell in love with the product, now they actually want to spend money and upgrade out of freemium to premium, then they talk to a salesperson. Well, what does this salesperson have to do? They have to convince them that those features are worth spending money on, but they're already sold conceptually into doing something. That's dangerous when you're selling and reaching out to, say, a more enterprise buyer that is often a cold sourced engagement. Cold will always be around, needs to be around. Buyers know, and they're hyper cognizant, especially in a space like cybersecurity. The size of the average tool stack in cybersecurity, it's mind blowing. 85 tools. That's almost incomprehensible to think about. They're actually
Insane.
cognizant that they can't know about everything. So even though there's this quasi-contentious relationship where you get CISOs rolling their eyes when they talk about salespeople reaching out to them, at the same time, they actually do understand that a huge part of their job responsibility is to be cutting edge. And in order to be cutting edge, that requires some measure of engaging with salespeople that are representing cutting edge technology. So there is a little bit of an uneasy relationship that says, yes, I will talk to you. But the minute you overextend on that relationship and try to foist tech on them without actually understanding the place of that tech for them, then you lose. So what does that become? Our job is most like that of physicians nowadays in modern selling. We have to diagnose before we prescribe. We have to leverage our specific in-depth knowledge of this buyer and what they do every day. We have to not necessarily interrogate, but some measure of it. We have to extract information in order to diagnose and then prescribe. That is modern selling. And when done well, buyers really appreciate that. There's an analogy I'll always draw, right? If you walk into a doctor's office and the doctor immediately launches into a long rant on why aspirin is the most amazing invention ever, and people used to have to chew on willow bark to cure their headaches, and wow, isn't it so cool that you can now take this tiny pill and it will cure any ailment related to pain? And the guy walks in and says, yeah, I'm kind of losing my hair. I'm here for Propecia. That, unfortunately, is what we do as salespeople constantly. We prescribe before we even understand what this person is suffering with. All the time. It's wild. And it's based on selling the virtue of the object rather than actually selling to and discovering and prescribing to the needs of the buyer. And getting to buyers that are displaying an inclination and harvesting those signals even before the interaction, and actually having a hypothesis that's predicated on information and coming in as an informed salesperson, assisting with the step where you know they are based on exactly the actions they've taken. That's sophisticated. That's interesting. That is facilitation and assisting your buyer in a process. Much different story. That was a really
And
long rant.
no, that's incredible. I feel like in the micro segment of cybersecurity enterprise software tools, right? It's exacerbated dramatically to any other vertical or
Oh yeah.
vertically aligned
Oh yeah.
software company, right? Because it's such
Oh
a
yeah.
cat and mouse game just for the nature of innovations in cyber crime, cyber criminals, and different entrapments that people can go through, right? So
Oh yeah, indeed.
these CISOs are more educated buyers than any other full enterprise software purchaser on the market by a long
Yes.
shot, right? And there's not just a interest in innovation, there's a purebred necessity,
Need.
right, to catch up
Exactly.
with with the same innovations
The
that are happening
mandate.
on the bad actor side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not optional. There is a constant need to try to stay one step ahead, which of course is impossible. So what do? You're trying to be proactive and mitigate the effects of anything that will potentially happen. Because speak to any CISO, and the answer is not how do I prevent? The answer is how do I minimize because I am going to have something happen to me. Everybody
Yeah.
does. And it's my responsibility to segment, to cordon off, to corral as best as possible. And you can't do that with education and training. The only way to do that practically is to have the right tools in place that will technically enable you to do these things.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that buyer journey a little bit more distinctly and maybe sort of the pre-information gathering stage, right?
Sure.
How do you advise your sales organizations to facilitate that? I know you're a huge proponent of working exceptionally closely and being exceptionally aligned more than most people I speak with your marketing organization to compound that in necessary ways, right? Because that's where a lot of
Yep.
that pre-buyer education actually happens. But how do you partner well with marketing, and then how do you work your sales team to, I don't know, advance that sort of journey before they get to the point where they're actually interacting with the buyers, or the buyers are interacting with you?
Yeah. So I think we're in a new potential golden age of content marketing again. I think it waned a little bit, but I think we're back with a real need for incredibly high quality content. I think there are two rough ways to go to market right now. Cold, sticking with my previous point, is not dead. And this is going to be a little bit of a circuitous route, but I'll get to your question, I promise. So cold is by no means dead, and you can go to the market cold, but that's a whole other ball of wax. That is a completely new paradigm. The types of tools that you have to leverage in order to do cold well right now are this plethora of tools that didn't even exist 18 months ago. And if they did, nobody was using them, right? Tools like Clay, tools like warming your mailbox up. It is a highly, highly specialized technical motion to maximize deliverability and maximize the value of your content and offer to go to market cold. Most companies don't have that skill set. Most companies don't actually have an understanding of what it takes to go to market cold. There's still a crazy proliferation around of predictable revenue style SDR teams on market whose efficacy has fallen off a cliff. So we've got cold on one side, which is an independent sales driven thing, but you're almost at the helm of a technological cockpit running very, very sophisticated analysis and motions. That's completely different. You're a go-to-market technician as a modern SDR right now, completely different function. So that's one side. The other side of it is exactly what you're referring to, is working incredibly closely with marketing. What does this actually distill down to? It's very simple. It's actually not even a new concept. Audience creation and nurturing. And how do you do audience creation and nurturing? High quality content. And this is omni-channel. I'm most a proponent of video of late. I really, really am. I still think we're barely scratching the surface of it. I think video content is something I believe in deeply. I think even in sales outreach, some of the early creators of the category, right, like Vidyard, They created a lot of the groundwork, I think, and a lot of the science that shows why video is actually a really, really effective means of async communication. COVID hits, of course, and video becomes the primary means of communication for almost all of B2B for a really long period. But I would argue that we're now in this golden age of Zoom and video style communication. It used to be, and I'm sure you remember too, we would hop on a Zoom when we did one. People wouldn't have their cameras on. It was just this kind of thing, and it wasn't a default mode of communication. Now
Yeah.
this is sync video communication. You're weird if you don't have your video on in a Zoom. That's really different than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Wild. And video is now, I would argue, it's missing a lot of the signals that we get face to face, but that's what we have to deal with. So high quality content, and then tracking and understanding your buyer's interaction with that content, and working together with marketing to understand the efficacy of individual pieces of content, understanding and mapping where buyers are actually converting, how they're responding back to us as a sales team when we're interacting with buyers at each phase. You can get really, really sophisticated, and you can start to build out buyer journeys based on buyer personas and understand when they're in a specific stage of their life cycle. Are they in evaluation? Are they in consideration? What type of content is actually going to move the needle with these buyers? What type of content is going to make them move from aware to consideration? Build that content, measure the efficacy, measure the quality of the leads, the conversion from cold or warm outreach to conversation, from conversation to opportunity, from opportunity to closed one, and operating marketing as an integral part of the sales cycle rather than marketing gives me leads, the leads aren't any good. Sales says the leads aren't any good. Marketing says you don't even call the leads I give you. And it's the old cliche fight, of course.
What specific signals are you looking for that give you the most valid indication that there's some sort of interest? Is it website clicks? Is it joining webinars? Is it just
Oh
interacting on
man,
social media?
all of the
What
above.
is it?
And I think that is, I'll home in on a couple that I think are most of interest, but it is quality and quantity. So when I say quality, it is where are they going on our website? And tying that back as indicative of their stage in the buyer's journey. Are they spending time on the pricing page? How much time? Where are they going after the pricing page? And you can science this thing and make a very educated guess as to where they are in the buying cycle by how much time and where they are, and then meet the buyer where they are. They may not necessarily need or want a meeting right now. You may want to proactively suggest someplace that they didn't go and reach out to them even without an ask. Proffer, offer, give. Sure, the meeting is always great, but only if it's a prescription. And that's one of my biggest themes is we are serving and consulting. Yes, we are agents of change, because if we
Yeah.
just waited around for people to come to us, the wheels of sales motion would just stop. Sure, people would still buy things, but especially in cybersecurity where they can't be cognizant of everything, there are, I would argue, tens of thousands of sales made a year in cybersecurity where the buyer didn't go into the interaction with a predetermined intent to buy this particular type or brand of tooling. That is driven by interaction. Therefore, our responsibility is to guide and shape and prescribe. And if we can do that and meet them where they are, the likelihood of interaction and engagement is going to go dramatically up.
How does this affect the way that you build your sales organization? There's so much content out there about leveraging technology. It's kind of interesting. Some people are deteriorating all the technology and going back to pure simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
They wish it was a stack of paper with leads and a pencil,
Mm-hmm.
right, and one
Yeah.
cell phone, and almost advise their organizations
Oh,
to act
thank
as
you.
such, right,
It
to
had its
break through
day.
the new noise by recessing, right. You're much more of a proponent, from what I can tell, right, of enabling, at least from an informational standpoint, to enhance those sales functions with technology. But people are leaning their sales teams up. They're making them smaller but more impactful. How do you go around planning how you're going to build out a sales organization, and how would you advise other people to? And then how does it change the profile of the person
Yeah,
that works
sure.
well in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think macro, there's one really significant change, which is again, and I know I'm demonizing predictable revenue, but that idea was you achieve
They'll
growth with,
understand.
yeah, you achieve growth with units of bodies, right? And that was how do I determine how we're going to get to our plan? X dollars per head, throw this many heads in, and we're good. And if the plan says I need 100 heads, that's what I tell my CEO. I need 100 heads and let's go. And of course, that doesn't work. I think it's vice versa. I think you have to re-engineer from market feasibility of top of funnel. And that's how you re-engineer and how you replan this thing. The new idea being how much demand can we generate? How many salespeople can generate that? How much can a salesperson reasonably generate? It's almost backwards. It's build the demand engine first. How many salespeople do we need in order to fulfill the demand that we can create? Not start from scratch and just say plug in bodies and we'll get there. No, you have to build the map first and then fill in. So my ideal type of salesperson is closer to that scientist approach. When they get the number, they're then going to decohere that single number into what actions do I need to take per my historical rates on each of these things? What can I do reasonably to get there? I know marketing is going to feed me this, and I know based on what I've done with previous marketing leads, here's how I'm going to do based on interactions I have face to face at a conference. If these are good, and if somebody's in my ICP, amazing. Those are going to be amongst my best. Here's what I'm going to get based on my relationships I have with my channel partners. Those are amazing. Here's what I'm going to get and how I'm going to do and the actions I'm going to take to get referrals from my existing client base. That's sciencing rather than don't worry, I'll come up with the number, right? Which is, of course, the old enterprise motion. Just leave me alone and I'll get you your deals. There are people that do it. They're magical, they're special, but there are people that can do that. It's your sales guy that's been in one industry for 20 years, actually does have a Rolodex. Of course, that's your unicorn. There's not a lot of those guys that can do that. And I would argue that even still, when that individual says, don't worry, I'll hit the number, modern sales dogma doesn't have a lot of
Say
room for the
otherwise.
black boxing of that. No, there's no real room for the lone wolf. Maybe there is if somebody is incredibly proven and incredibly reliable and does their $20 million quota every single year. You can rely on them. But I would argue those people are few and far between. So I'm looking for that analytical ability that says you don't have to push me to figure out how I'm going to do it. I already know I'm going to do it if I do the math and have my really, really tightly drawn analytics that show exactly how I'm going to get there based on my own past performance. If it's a new gig, well, I have an idea because I'm asking you how the existing team is doing in these categories, and I'm correlating that against how I've done in those categories in my past gigs. And I am planning. It is a COO type approach to sales. And I'm a huge advocate of that. We don't have the room to just spray and pray in any channel. Analyze, do, iterate, revise, analyze, iterate, revise. And that's of course my early stageness showing in that Kaizen
Well,
is
I
what we
think
do, right?
what you said there at the end is a very important part. Analyze, report, and revise, right? A lot of people get trapped in this mantra of science-led sales, but without the constant improvement of the equation in real time as the market is changing, especially at a velocity like the cybersecurity market does, if you are not adapting the recipe as quickly as you're performing against it, then
Yep.
you're assuming a lot of risk, right? If you're just following one strict methodology without adherence to changing market change demands and buyer interest and cycles and things like that, right?
Oh
Which are
yeah.
happening faster and faster, you know? And
Yeah.
that I've seen a lot of people fault their organizations by being too principled in that, right? And not being flexible enough to adapt it as the market circumstances are changing, which is on like a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis
Yeah.
right now.
As well as potentially even the most important layer and aspect of that, the differences between your individual salespeople and building out
Yeah.
individual coaching plans for them, but using the same principles of assist, analyze, coach, train, reevaluate, assist, analyze, coach, train. It's almost like this little baby continuous SDLC in our sales operating system, the way I see it.
Well, last question for you, Keith. Like when you're looking at specific people to come in, what skill sets for a salesperson is more attractive to adapt, right, to that sort of cycle that you're seeing now? Like
Yep.
I can imagine the expertise in an industry or a product segmentation is more important.
Sure.
That's something I hear a lot from
It's
buyers, right, that
important.
are looking for new talent because they can
Uncertain.
empathize with their
Yeah.
buyers and
Yeah.
recognize those signals
Yeah.
more often than not. Processed and methodical approach, can't get that word
Yep.
out, is obviously something that gets qualified and has been qualified for some times, but it has a title importance on it as the market contracts a little
Yep.
bit, right? What
Yep.
other attributes are you looking for?
Yeah. So I think it's one that too often gets left assumed, but one of the facets that I like, and you could call it a couple of different things, but I love grit slash determination to win. And I think it's so important. And I'll go into another one of my oft used analogies, which is that sales is wild. We lose professionally. There's almost no other career where you lose 70% of the time and you're a wild success. There's only one other, right? It's crazy. Think about it, right? I mean, if you are in any profession, if you're a doctor and 70% of your patients die, you're not a doctor for very long, right?
Not mine.
Yeah, exactly. Yet we lose 70% of the time and we're celebrated. That's wild. That is contrary to almost every analysis of the human psyche. It's our caveman brain runs away from pain. That's how we learn. If things are painful, don't do it. Oh, if I go to pet that bear and the bear bit my hand off, I don't want to lose my other hand. So I'm going to stay away from that bear. Well, yet again, salespeople run into the burning building. We say, you know what? That was my fault. I reached for its mouth. I should have come around from the back. You know what? The next bear, I'm going to come around from the back and it'll work. Well, it'll work 30% of the
We'll
time.
see.
But
what can
we have
someone
to
do
keep
today?
going. We have to keep going. So that measure of grit, let's define that and let's talk about that. It is almost this insufferable optimism, yet at the same time, a willingness to have deep introspection and analysis and self-critique. I'm awesome. I wasn't awesome enough. How do I become more awesome? But I'm awesome and I'm going to keep going. It is this dichotomy that every salesperson has, every successful salesperson. I'm amazing. I'm the best. I'm going to keep going. The sun is shining. It's awesome. I'm not good enough. I got to get better. I'm awesome. I'm not good enough. That's
Yeah,
impossible. It's inhuman. It's why a lot of people can't do selling, because you have to constantly live in both of those worlds in order to be successful.
it's what do they call it? Masocism. Love the
Yeah,
pain.
exactly. Again, oh, look, a burning house. That looks fun. Let me go run inside.
This is brilliant, Keith. We could do five more of these, right? Or to be conscious
Indeed.
of time. And I think this is incredibly insightful. I'm learning a lot on this. I'm sure everyone's taking away some good bits on it. I mean, what's one or two things someone can do today, right, to implement some of these tactics or at least this change in mindset in their sales organization that
Sure.
you would tell them to get started with?
Yeah,
Simple tactical elements of it.
absolutely. Tactical, one of the best things you can possibly do is have your calls analyzed. Even if you're only doing it yourself, you need to take batting practice in order to do better. And you need to watch game tape and think about professional football players. If they are not on the field, even when they're on the field, you see Tom Brady getting that Surface tablet, or he did. He probably still does it for all we know. But watching tape even while on the field, what can I do better? What did I do? What are they doing? How do I optimize for that? It is the number one best suggestion. Force your manager to go through your calls and tell you what you can do better. If they're not holding you accountable, make them hold you accountable. But even if you don't have a system that supports that, find a way to analyze and define known good. Find the best salesperson in your organization and start to analyze and pay attention and watch their tape. Understand the delta between what you do and what they do. Quantify it. If you can't, find someplace to get coaching. There are ways and means to do it online. I'll plug a company like Hard Skill Exchange. They're awesome. That's Julia Nimchinsky, and they've written even a couple of books out there on it. I'm on there. I do coaching, but find a coach. Find someone that can actually push you to improve. The number one suggestion to get better: watch your tape and upskill.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for all of this, Keith. This is incredibly insightful, and I'm sure I'm going to impact quite a few people that are listening to this. Thank you, everyone, for joining another episode of Go-to-Market Kickback, and we'll be back again soon, hopefully with Keith.
Awesome. Thanks for
Appreciate
having
the
me.
time.